Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and today we're visiting with Lori Gano, author of How He Loves Us, Revealing the Affections of God. Lori, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Lori, you have such an interesting background on a mission to connect women with God's passionate love for them. Speaker, teacher, author, and businesswoman Lori Gano founded Out of Ashes Ministry. Lori has spent her career in construction as a licensed general contractor and owner of a residential design and build construction company. It's here where God implanted a passion for restoration and grew that passion into a longing to see women restored in the fullness of Christ. Lori and her husband Jonathan have one teenage daughter and live in the beautiful hills of East Tennessee. You can find more about her at outofashesministries.com. Lori, of course, quite interesting that you're a licensed general contractor, a home builder.
Yes.
Where did that love for that begin?
You know, it wasn't the exchange that everyone would think. I think that there are several women that I have met along the way that have come into construction because their family has been in construction, or specifically their father or grandfather has been in construction. I had none of that connection to the construction industry. In fact, I grew up in a pretty rough situation, and when I hit 18, I bought my first house, and it was certainly a fixer-upper, and then I rented the house out, and my renters destroyed that house, and I met my stepfather over there. He took a look at the house, and he said, you know, I guess I'm going to loan you the money to fix it, and you're going to pay me back. And I said, absolutely not. I'm not taking your money. And he said, well, what do you think you're going to do here? And I said, I'm going to fix it myself, and then I'll sell it. And he said, Lori, you don't have a clue what you're doing. You cannot do this. And boy, that lit a fire in me. And I said, don't tell me I can't do something. And so I entered into the construction industry first and foremost because I wanted to prove my father wrong. So I'm not sure that's the best reason, but it began a passion in me, and it was the first thing that I did really well. And so that took off. And as soon as I finished that house, I wanted to start another one, and business grew from there.
You know, you have a fire, a certain strength, focus, commitment. Was that something that you demonstrated as a child? Did you grow up in a faith-based home? Was something, did something happen that just kind of set you free, that put you on a path of, using construction terms, of a bulldozer as opposed to a finishing piece of paper?
Right, right. Yes, I grew up in really an extraordinary situation that I did not know was extraordinary at the time. My biological father, not the one that I was out to prove wrong, that was my stepfather, but my biological father, when I was very young, he was diagnosed as being schizophrenic, suffering from extreme psychosis. And he was in the Air Force. He did 2 tours in Vietnam, and he came back even more unstable. In fact, I don't think anyone really realized how deep the instability was until he returned. And he was violently abusive and very dangerous. We would come home to weapons being pulled on us. There's so many stories of different instances of abuse, but there was one thing in particular that really stuck with me. And you know what I think is important to understand about him was that he was so delusional. He lived in his own fantasy world. So the lies and the life that he made up, I believe that he really thought that he lived that life. He told us that he was a member of the CIA and that it was his job to take out the undesirables. And he would leave our house for hours or days at a time with different weapons. And to this day, we still don't know what he was doing during those times. But there was one particular incident for me specifically. I was very young, 5 years old, and he was sitting in his recliner in our living room, and he was eating a hot dog with a fork. And I approached him and asked him if I could have a bite of the hot dog. And he looked at me so with so much perversion and a quiet violence. It wasn't loud and rage filled like we had seen so often, but he began to feed me bites of that hot dog, and he would stab me in the back of the throat over and over and over with a fork until I vomited. And so that began a battle that I had with anxiety. And of course, then I didn't know that it was anxiety. I would feel this rush of terror, and I would have a real physiological response to that. And it began to build momentum over the years. My brother also suffered, and my mother suffered from mental illness. My mother struggling with depression, and she was alcohol dependent with that, and my brother was in and out of mental institutions. And so I just lived in this house of darkness, and I really had no idea that this was not normal, because it was my normal and I wasn't seeing much of anything else. So in this battle with anxiety that I had, it grew and grew and grew as things spiraled out of control. Eventually my parents divorced. My mom was a single mom dealing with her own demons and trying to raise two children, one of whom was struggling himself, and so she had planned out her own suicide and our deaths with that. And so, man, I would just come home to this incredible darkness that there aren't words to really give light to. But that anxiety that I had began to grow so much that I landed myself really with panic disorder. And so I was having multiple panic attacks a day. And it reverted back to that instance of abuse with my father. And so my anxiety attached itself to throwing up. And I began to withhold food because I decided that if I couldn't control anything, I would control that one thing. And became anorexic and battled anorexia then for what would be 16 years before I really stepped into freedom. But I came to know the Lord at 13. I began to walk to my grandmother's house on Sunday mornings, or she would pick me up, and I got involved in a youth activity where we traveled to King College in Johnson City, Tennessee, and that weekend, quietly in a room by myself, after hearing someone's testimony, I gave my life to the Lord, and I remember feeling so transformed, feeling that fullness of hope in that moment. But I was traveling to go right back home to the house that I had been in for so many years, and so I didn't have the discipleship. I didn't have the understanding to really know what life was supposed to look like beyond that. And the years started to get worse, actually. And at 16, I met a man who told me everything I thought I ever wanted to hear. You're beautiful, and I love you, and you're wonderful, and you're all of these things. And very quickly drug me into a life of absolute sexual sin that was beyond anything I even knew existed. And so I, even knowing the Lord, even belonging to God, had stepped foot into a life that was extraordinarily apart from Him in every sense.
You're obviously in this battle, waging a war for your soul. It's pretty common that someone who has just come to faith would face a major attempt to derail their walk with the Lord. How did you navigate your way out of this?
I was in that situation, in that relationship with that man for 5 years. He introduced me to every vile thing you can imagine. And there was a point at which I fully accepted it. I was no longer a victim of everything that was going on. I was very much living in this open lifestyle that included relationships with men and women, married, single. It didn't matter. I didn't know what boundaries were. I had no idea of the value that I had as a child of God. And after so many years of being manipulated and used in the worst ways by the worst people, and being taught that was love and that it was good, that's the most deceptive part of it. Is it not only becomes normal, but you're made to believe that that's what love is. And so there was several years where I stepped out of the relationship with him, but I continued on a destructive path of just destroying marriages, destroying people. I had so much hatred in me. My closest friends were pagans and Wiccans, witches and warlocks, felons, strippers, abusers, just the absolute worst people that had no repentance, no desire to know God, no desire to help and serve and love others. They just were compelled to do what selfishly they wanted. And in that, I had this twisted mindset that if I could just do something well, if I could do business well, if I could succeed in some sense of life, then that would make me acceptable to others. And so that is at first what compelled me to operate in a successful business venture, such as construction, or I've been in several things, but construction being that primary thing I've done for 21 years. I was so compelled because I wanted to do it perfect. I wanted to do it right so I would be accepted and I would be loved. But, coming out of that lifestyle I had been so deeply rooted in with that man, for 5 years, I continued doing it. I didn't know anything else, and I was manipulating people and using people, and it was just absolutely horrible. And then I met my husband one day, and he actually came into a restaurant that I was managing. I was doing construction part-time and working as a restaurant general manager full-time, and he came in for a job, and actually I fired him, was the way that we really got to know one another. But in that moment when I met him, he was the first man that had been around in so many years who knew the God that I remembered for that little blip of time at 13 years old. And so in my relationship with who would become my husband, that's what began to turn that light back on, to lead me out of the mess. And that was quite a journey in itself as well.
Now, were you being trafficked, or were you being voluntarily just used?
Absolutely voluntarily just used. And I would say that I was probably 2 steps away from trafficking, which is why I have such a heart for women who are coming out of that horrible lifestyle. It was at 16, I was being passed around to this man's friends to be used however they saw fit. And it was a very open, very vile lifestyle, and it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible.
This was your dark secret.
Yes.
Did anyone else around you know that this was going on?
No, not at all. In fact, my relationships with my parents were strained. I have not had any contact with my biological father since I was a young child. But my mother, my stepfather, my grandmother, those who, shared some form of life with me had no idea that this was what was going on. Certainly only those people who were themselves involved in that lifestyle knew.
When you first met your husband, there was something about him that was uniquely different than anybody else you had encountered. What was it you saw in him that you hadn't seen in anybody else?
Yes. He, first and foremost, he wasn't interested in dating me for a physical relationship, where I had been so used to relationships that were only physical and nothing else. That was what life was about. Life just existed for sex. And that was really the perception of what everyone that I knew before that time, that's how they operated. And so first and foremost, that wasn't anything that Jonathan was interested in. That wasn't anything that he was pursuing. He was just interested in us, having a date. And so during that first date, we began a conversation where he shared with me that he had grown up in a Christian home, that he had been in Christian schools, and he had gone to a Christian college. And I just thought, oh, wow. It was so foreign to me. And we began to just speak and talk about family and people and, in our lives. And certainly when you are in a lifestyle that has everything to do with sex, that means it has nothing to do with people and who they are and what they've been created to do. And you don't really get to know people in any other sense. And so that really was a moment where I saw someone who cared and was concerned about who I was and where I had been and what had happened.
As the relationship progressed, did you ever become concerned that I lived a life that was the antithesis of the life that he grew up in? What will they think of me when they find out who I really am?
To be honest with you, at that time, no, because everyone that I knew lived that lifestyle. In my mind, I did not know that there was anything other than that available for life. I thought that was it. And I have to tell you that I was a young child who was very sensitive, very loving. I wanted to please people. I wanted to serve people. I wanted to help people. And as I got older and I had been so immersed in the darkness of mental illness and that struggle in my house, and then introduced to this lifestyle by the man that I was with, I began to think that there was no one else out there that wanted those things that I wanted. And so I allowed myself to become calloused, allowed myself to become changed, and moved into this place of greed and lust and being self-driven by everything. But internally, I wanted something different. I just didn't think that there were others that existed like that. So when I met Jonathan, it would make a lot of sense for me to say, sure, I was scared to death that he would just think I was terrible, but I didn't, because I actually thought that everyone was terrible and he was just different. And so it didn't concern me initially. The first time that I realized that there was something wrong was when I shared with him more specifically as our relationship rapidly progressed to marriage. But as our relationship progressed and I began to share with him a little bit more specifically, I need you to know that these are the things that went on. These were the things that he had me doing. He broke down and cried. And we've been married 17 years now. I've seen him cry 2 times. So, that was significant to see. And that was the first time I thought, oh, wow, so this really isn't normal. This really isn't okay.
Jonathan obviously saw something in you that was more than just what you did. It was about seeing who you were. Your self-view was a pure reflection of the environment that you lived in. His view of you was something that was beautiful, something that was different, something that was special, and he saw a potential in you. He saw past the natural into the supernatural. When did you discover that God had sent this man to pull you out of this, and how did that come about? How were you able to realize that? Because here you are today talking, writing a book about coming out of the ashes. Great story, personal story. But when you come out of the ashes, you're still dirty. You're still covered in ashes. Just because you come out of the ashes does not make you clean. It just makes you dusty.
That's right.
All right. So what was the process of taking you from being ash covered to being washed clean?
Well, and don't you know that that's exactly right, because you've got to imagine how twisted my thinking had become, how skewed my perception was of people, men, women, of relationships, of marriage, of love and intimacy, of all of those things. My perception had become so tainted and so twisted. And so nothing about me was healthy enough to step into a marriage and to know how to operate with love and selflessness and certainly commitment. And so, and when we were married, and mind you, I am the poster child of what not to do, because we went on our first date, and 5 weeks later we were married. But immediately I began to see things in Jonathan that I did not like. He struggled with anger, and I didn't want to have a thing to do with that after growing up with my father. I certainly, as twisted as my life was, that manipulation was some sense of control for me. And so I was not interested in being back under this feeling of fear, constant fear. And so when we were initially married and I saw a little bit of his anger, I became very frightened, and I didn't want to have anything to do with the marriage. And I immediately went out and I was unfaithful. And so I recognized then that God was trying to wake me up. And I've got dates in my Bible right around the time that we were married where I had just started to open my Bible again. And after I was unfaithful to Jonathan, probably 2 months, 3 months had passed, and I was wrestling with wanting a divorce. I wanted out already. And so just a couple more months in, I think 6 months in, I found out I was 6 weeks pregnant. Now, this was a big deal for me because at the age of 18, I had been told by doctors that I carry cystic fibrosis, the worst form of it, and that I would not ever be able to conceive children. And so when I found out I was pregnant, I knew that that was God saying, you are going to stay put now. I have awakened you. I have pursued you. And I need you to sit down and shut up, Lori. That's really what I felt. And I knew it to every part of me that he was trying to make me sit down and stay put in that marriage. And that's really when I began a full-on surrendered pursuit of Christ again. And it was because I didn't want my child to grow up in any form of a life that I had. I wanted it to look completely different for her.
It's an incredible story of brokenness, of struggles on both sides, the life you led, and the man you married, that you didn't really know him, but he was different than all the rest. And so this was the attraction. And as the layers become peeled back for both of you, you fall back into behaviors that were responses to the exact same stimuli. He's now faced with a situation where he's married and he doesn't really know you, because after 5 weeks, how well could he really know you? And here you are now, you're thrown into this and you're pregnant, and you make the decision, I'm going to make this work. We're going to pull this marriage together, and we're going to take this walk together, and that you are going to not just come out of the ashes, but you are going to cleanse yourself. You're going to become the righteousness of God. You're going to create a home and a marriage that is glorifying. And you mention in your book, in He Loves Us, Revealing the Affections of God, one of my favorite characters, Rahab, who goes on to become Boaz's mother, who becomes Ruth's redeemer, who takes us to the line of Jesus. And here she is a harlot. Here she comes from the worst of the worst background and is matriarchal to Jesus himself. And this is the greatest story of redemption. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk with Lori Gano more about how He loves us, revealing the affections of God, and the 8 women in the Bible that she mentions that she thinks that they have something in common with her, and she has something in common with them, and they have something in common with each other, and why that's significant. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Lori Gano, author of How He Loves Us, Revealing the Affections of God. Lori, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Lori, in the book, you break it down to, you really write about 8 very specific women in the Bible, and you say they have something in common, not only with each other, but they have something in common with a common theme of a message from God and how He uses it to walk and reveal this affection that He has for each one of them, but always in a different way.
That's right. That's right.
How did this come about?
Well, as I really began my pursuit of God and a life lived to serve Him, and you walk through that journey of deeper and deeper surrender to Him, I began to feel this nudge to work with women, to serve women, teach women the Word, who were coming out of pretty difficult life situation. So I began teaching women who were coming out of prostitution, prison, addiction, human trafficking, domestic violence, childhood abuse, different really devastating situations. And I certainly could relate to them. And first and foremost, when I would meet a new group, I would share my testimony with them. I wanted them to know that, I wasn't sitting disconnected from their own stories and their own walks and their struggles, but I very much understood, and I wanted them to see and know who God is and how he sees them, even in the mess that they were currently in. And so I had attended a workshop, and I just want to honor Pastor Ryan Wyatt. I had attended a workshop that he did on the Song of Solomon several years ago, and it was the first time that it was presented in a teaching that I had been involved in as the allegory between Christ and his bride. And so, we know from Ephesians 5 that when we look at marriage, at the picture of marriage that God has created, that there's something much more deep to that. It's a great mystery, but I speak concerning the church. And so this was presented as, how does this poetry of the Song of Solomon relate to a pursuit between Christ and his people, between him and us as an individual believer? And so I sat in this workshop and I was captivated, but I wanted to take that information and I wanted to spend time in it alone with the Lord and really sift it through the Word. And I wanted God to speak to me through that and to show me. And for 3 years I studied that. And I would go in and teach these women during these years of study, and I kept coming back to the Song of Solomon saying, I just need you to understand the way your king loves you, the way he pursues you, the way he sees you. And I began to write a study because I wanted them to know the Shulamite and the way the king pursues the Shulamite, but I also wanted them to see that there was a consistent message, not only for her in the Song of Solomon, but also through the stories of different women of the Bible. And those stories with those women weren't a cookie cutter version of the perfect woman who does it all right. But instead, these are women, Sarah, who was known for her faith, who was faithless in some situations, who showed her immaturity and maybe, a lack of trust in some areas. And so God still saw the goodness of who she was and her faith in her God. And that was what counted her as faithful. And so I wanted the ladies that I was working with to see the women of the Bible not as perfect pictures of righteousness, but rather as women who are very much like us, but that God has made righteous through his work.
You reach into the ashes because that's an area you're familiar with. And ask people to grab a hold of your hand and you pull them out of the ashes and then dust them off. And your book is a journey through that process. You write that men and women were created with equality of purpose. I don't know that we hear a lot of that they have an equality of purpose, that they have a purpose, wife being the health maker, but the equality of purpose. Help us understand that.
Yes, and this was a journey for me as well, because again, with what I had come out of, there was a lot of perversion in my own thinking with the relationships between men and women, women and women, men and men. And so I had to come back to a biblical understanding of this is the way that we were designed by God, and we are equal in essence, but we're different in function. And so the one who modeled that perfectly for us was Christ himself, always in submission to God the Father, but he never wrestled with his identity. He never wrestled with his rights towards something, because his submission to God the Father was perfect, and he understood that submission held honor. And so if we can begin to understand as women that we were created equal in essence, that God loves us the same, he sees our value the same, but our function is different, then we can let go of those struggles with identity and really know with full confidence that we have value, we have worth, and it's all based on how God has created us.
Who was it in the Bible that you began to identify with first?
Certainly I can identify with Rahab. I love the woman at the well, but the one that gave me the most freedom in my walk with God was the Shulamite. And it was understanding um, the way that her journey walked out. And what I do in the book and how he loves us is we begin at chapter 1 of the Song of Solomon and we go through chapter 8. And it's really a line by line study of the walk of the Shulamite. And we watch her in chapter 1, even there wrestling with, I'm black, but I'm comely. I'm a mess, but I also have something in here that the king desires, that he loves, that he sees as having value. And then we watch her progress in her journey with him, not doing things perfectly. In fact, he asks things of her in some of the earlier chapters where she says, no, you're going to have to go and do this without me. I can't do this. And so we watch this woman who is representing the bride of Christ wrestle with who she is and what she's capable of doing until she really comes to know that partnered with him, paired with her king, she's capable of anything. But it's a journey for her to become aware of that and to know that. But we always see the king pursuing her. We always see him building her up, loving her. He always calls to her as being flawless, undefiled. And those things we know represent that because such as in Song of Solomon 5, and I believe it's verse 7 or so. I'm looking. It's actually verse 2. It's the latter part of verse 2. The king's knocking on the door and he says, "Open to me, my sister, my love, my dove, my undefiled." And that word undefiled means perfect morally, usually when coupled together. And so we know that that message is consistent through the Song of Solomon, that the king is always crying to the bride saying, I have made you perfect because you're partnered with me now. I am the one that makes you righteous. I am the one that makes you flawless. And not just because I look at you and say you're forgiven, but I look at you and every bit of that mess that hangs on you from what you have done, what you have walked through, what you have chosen, I've taken it off of you and I've put it on myself. I've hung it on myself. And now I look at you and I see you as flawless. And if we can take that to heart, if we can understand that, especially for those of us who have done horrible, horrible things, then we really understand what his sacrifice means for us.
God makes us stronger at the broken places so that when we come up against them, they won't break again, but they'll be recognized as a place that was healed. When you look at your life and you see the healing and the restoration, what do you go to for strength in that? You look in the past and you see this jumbled mess of humanity. You look in the mirror, you see who you are today, knowing that from those ashes you've risen, and yet you also acknowledge that unless we're broken, we can't be restored. Unless we're sick, we can't be healed. Unless we're flawed, we can't be perfected. That it is part of the process that we must embrace, not that we should go run out and do things so that we can get a check mark in the broken category, but we have to recognize where it is that we're broken. How did you come to reconcile that within yourself? Because you had anorexia, you had you had infidelity, you had sexual sin, you had all these things. How were you able to translate those into really making them change from a block of coal to a shining diamond?
That's where God is just so incredibly personal to me. There's three things that are just my favorite things about the Christian faith. And one of those is that he's the most individual God. He doesn't throw us all in a pile and treat us all the same way. Instead, what he offers us is a relationship. And so the fact that he's an individual God, the fact that I'm not out here trying to learn and teach a religion, but rather walk in a relationship with a God who wants to know me and wants me to know him. Those are incredible things to me. And so, he knows me, he knows you, he knows that I love to work with my hands, he knows that I love to create and to build and to do. And so I believe that along the walk of restoration, he allowed me into that field of construction so that I could begin to create and see. And my passion for construction was always in restoration and renovations. And so I would walk into these houses and I would see what everyone else would see as the most broken down, the most unrepairable mess of a house that they don't like. They don't like anything about it. And I would walk in and see what it could be. I would see it for its potential, and I would become so excited about it. And you've got to imagine, over 21 years, I have peeled back the layers off of more walls than I can count. You know, changing things structurally, tearing off roofs, adding different floors to the home, things like that. And in that process, the Lord really began to speak to me a parallel between, you know, the way that he's designed and created us to begin with as the master builder, and the way the storms of life, the decisions that we've made, the things that we have let in, have come in and destroyed. And then what the process of restoration looks like. And he began to speak to me that parallel in the lives of people, the houses, because at that time I didn't feel safe enough to love people and to be loved by people. But as he began to reveal to me the parallel, that beautiful parallel in the process of restoration between homes and lives, it started to pour into me, just that overflow of the Holy Spirit. It started to pour into me this love that I could not contain. And so my focus moved from homes to people, and I saw value in the mess. I saw value in what could have and would have been learned by the things that we didn't do well, the things that we let come in and destroy homes that had no business being there. And so it's really a perspective shift. And honestly, I feel wholeheartedly that that's what all of life is about, is the perspective that we choose. And when I say all of life is about, that's really the third thing. My favorite thing about Christianity is I don't have to question the meaning of life anymore. I know what it is. I know why we're here. And then our focus becomes, am I focused on surrendering my life to serving the Lord? And so if we can shift our perspective to how we are seeing life, I know why I'm here. I want to walk out the purpose that God has for me. I want to serve him. I want to serve others. Am I surrendering that to him daily? But if my perspective in everything that happens shifts to seeing it through a lens of God's goodness and his love, then I have a whole different view of life. And that's part of what I feel so strongly that the Song of Solomon offers us, and the stories of these women offer us, and what we've done in this book is to try and show people a perspective through which we're seeing life through the lens of God's love, and not the reality of all these things that are not fun, and they hurt, and they're painful, and they're destructive, and our finances are a mess, and our jobs aren't working, and our marriages are destroyed, and our children are disobedient, and all these things are awful. If we can remove our lens that we have right in front of us of this reality that we think that we know, and instead see it through what God is doing and how he is loving us in that process, and how he's conforming us to the image of Christ, then we have a whole different perspective on life. And that's really the goal, is in any situation, depending on our perspective, we are either going to see and understand who God is and how he loves us in the midst of what we're dealing with, or we're going to see complete devastation and ruin and darkness, and we'll let ourselves be destroyed by that in our faith.
In your examination of the scripture and the lives and how God grabs our attention, did you find that you came to understand discipline, that you came to understand pruning, you came to understand the breaking of the old, this picture of the branch that does not bear fruit is cut off and thrown into the fire? Well, that's metaphorical, it's real, it's logical, it's natural, it's supernatural, it's all of that. But you have to be willing to do that and suffer through the pain in order for there to be new growth. How was that process for you, and where did you find comfort to survive that? Because you're now on the other side. But to get to the other side, you had to go through a tremendous amount of obstacles. First of all, the biggest obstacle was yourself. The next obstacle was reconciling your past. the next obstacle was, can there really be such a thing as a loving God that's going to take this pile of ashes, and will he take from the dust of the earth and reform me into something beautiful, wonderful, and lovable, and a reflection of him? And then, oh, by the way, I got this guy over here that I married after 5 weeks, and I got to deal with that. And I got to go through watching that remodel, that reveal. You know, what were the parallel timelines for this, and how did you navigate them? Because you had to have been going through some soul searching, some painful times. I can imagine that the thoughts of it would probably be easier to just end it all than it would be to even fix it all.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And I love that you brought up the pruning work, because that's such a strong message in the Song of Solomon, and how we are the garden of God. We are that place that he comes to for refreshing, but also it's a work. You know, there's things that have to be done in that garden to maintain it, to remove the things that don't belong there. And certainly that's what he's doing in our lives. And I can tell you, it wasn't a fairy tale walk. It wasn't that I came into marriage with Jonathan and all of a sudden birds were singing and the sun was shining. It wasn't that way at all. In fact, it was the opposite, because when I surrendered to the Lord and I said, okay, I'm going to stop all of this craziness. I'm going to live for you. I'm going to pursue you in the way that you have pursued me. I don't want my daughter, I don't want my child to walk through the life that looks anything like I've walked through. So I want to change. I'm ready for change. He didn't just wave a magic wand and suddenly I'm Cinderella who has been rescued by a prince. In fact, it was the opposite. And so we hit wall after wall after wall where, you know, I believed that the Lord was not only refining me, but testing me and refining me and testing me and over. And we walked through some really difficult trials during that time. We'd lost Jonathan's mother to leukemia. I was actually pregnant with twins, and so one twin is with Jesus and one twin is here that I have the honor of raising. I was terrified I was going to lose her because I felt that I didn't deserve her. I lost my job because of the high-risk pregnancy, and so we found ourselves in bankruptcy, homeless, without a car, selling our possessions just to eat. And so everything about life became 100 times more difficult, certainly not more easy. And that wasn't the perception that I had as a very, very immature believer at that time. You know, I thought, well, this is it. I've given my life to the Lord, so that means he's going to clean it all up and make it better, right? But, you know, that's not the way that he works. We have to surrender ourselves to the work of restoration. And that means pain, and it means difficulties, and it means that we're going to be challenged, and our thinking is going to be challenged, and our faith is going to be challenged. But all those things have been in that process of meaning to move me and grow me and mature me. And so as a Christian, we have to know that that's an opportunity, and it's a golden opportunity. Every time we hit something that seeks to destroy us, that is an opportunity to look at God and say, okay, I hate this. I'm not going to lie to you, God. I don't like this, but show me what I need to learn. Show me where you're trying to grow me. Show me what I can do in this moment to come out of this closer to you and not further away. And so, pursuing him and surrendering to him really means surrendering to those times that are the most difficult. And I've told the women that I taught for those years so many times that I finally reached a point where I stopped saying, why me? Why me? Why this again? Why this again? God, can you not make it all stop? And instead I've said to him, you know what? Bring it on. If I need this next thing in order to be conformed to the image of Christ, bring it, and just help me endure it. Help me to learn from it.
Well, it's an incredible journey, an incredible story. I'd like you to close out this program talking directly to the men and women who have experienced the life or one similar to yours, where they've hit the point where they think, I'm not worth it, I can't ever get out of it, it can't ever change. What would you say to them? I have to go back to,
why are we here? Why are we existing? Why has God given us the life that he's given us? And it's to have an opportunity to know him and to choose him. And so if you have chosen to know him, are you willing to let your life continue to slide away and slip out of your hands toward a self-driven purpose? Or would you rather know and encounter the purpose that he has gifted to you? Would you rather walk in the destiny that he has laid out for you? And I reached a place where I decided I didn't want to waste one more minute of my life on me. And I had finally encountered restoration. I had had some business successes that were crazy and fun and wonderful, but I knew that I didn't want to waste my life on me. And so I would ask any of you out there who have struggled in whatever manner of sin or difficulty or devastation that you've walked in, I would ask you to evaluate that and just to say, you know what? Am I willing? Ask yourself that question. Am I willing to give up what it is that God would have for me to do for something that is going to be less fulfilling? Because I can promise you that there is more passion in the calling that he has on your life than there is in any perfect world you can imagine. I often set out 2 boxes at some of these events that I speak at. I'll set out 2 boxes. One of them is wrapped in perfect wrapping paper with a beautiful bow. And I tell them, imagine everything in this box that you have ever wanted for your life. Everything, the marriage, the job, the location, the vacations, the relationships, everything that you've ever wanted. Imagine it in that box. And then in this plain box over here, imagine the life that God has for you. You don't know what's in it. You don't know what pain is in it. There could be pain. There could be loss. There could be difficulties. You may never have the finances you want, the job you want. You may never live in the location you want. But if you could only pick one box, which one would you pick? And then when we decide on that box, are we going to fully embrace it and just say, yes, God, I will do that thing, and I will believe and trust that you are going to bring fulfillment and satisfaction into my life because I am walking in the calling that you have on me. I believe that God aligns our heart to have the desires that he has purposed for us in that. And so, yeah, it's just coming back to that place of going, I'm willing to walk away from what I hope for in order to walk out what he hopes for me.
Lori Gano sharing with us her new book, How He Loves Us, Revealing the Affections of God. She says that if it can happen to her, it can happen to you. That God is no respecter of persons. And that no matter what you've done, there's nothing you can ever do that will make God stop loving you. Get a copy of this book and take the journey with her and walk alongside of her. And maybe you'll see that your path, your feet fit right in the footprints of so many who have walked this path before. Lori, thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth. We look forward to seeing you on your next book. Maybe we'll get down to the studio, bring you here in person.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.